She entered the wrong car. He was the most feared man in the city. She was just trying to get home. Neither of them was ready for what came next. Chapter 1. The Wrong Car. 11:47 p.m. St. Mercy General Hospital, Chicago. Imara Cole hadn't slept in 31 hours. She stood outside the hospital's rear exit, the November air cutting through her scrubs like a verdict, her rideshare app blinking a lazy blue dot somewhere on the map. She was too tired to care that the car was 3 minutes away, too tired to care about anything except her feet, which had been screaming at her since hour 19. The black SUV idling at the curb was exactly where the app said it would be. Same model, same dark-tinted windows. She pulled open the rear door, dropped her bag on the seat, and folded herself in without a second glance. Lakeview, please. The building on Fullerton with the broken intercom just honked twice. Silence. Not the comfortable silence of a driver focused on the road, the kind of silence that has weight, that presses against your ears. Imara looked up from her phone. The man in the front seat wasn't her driver. He was Korean, early 30s, jaw carved from something colder than bone. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, and he was watching her in the rearview mirror with the stillness of someone who had never been surprised by anything in his life. Until now. Two other men sat on either side of her. She hadn't noticed them. She noticed them now. Imara. I'm in the wrong car. The man slowly. You are. Imara. You should have said something when I got in. The man. I was curious what you would do. Imara. What I would do, I would get out, that's what I'm doing. She reached for the door handle. Also, your left hand. You've been holding it against your thigh since I sat down. That's not a normal resting position. You're guarding an injury. The rearview mirror reflected nothing for a long moment. Then, almost imperceptibly, one corner of his mouth moved. He told the driver to take her to Lakeview. She didn't argue. In the interest of full honesty, she spent the entire 12-minute ride assessing the bruising pattern visible at his collar and quietly calculating what organs might be involved. Old habits from 8 years in emergency medicine don't switch off just because you're being chauffeured by organized crime. When the SUV stopped outside her building, the man said only one thing. The man. Your name. Imara. You already know it. You're the kind of person who already knows everything. She got out. Ice the hand, 30 minutes on, 20 off. The bruising suggests a hairline fracture, not a clean break. You'll live. She was inside before he could respond. Upstairs, she sat on the edge of her bed fully clothed and stared at the ceiling until sleep swallowed her. His name, she would learn, was Han Jae-won. He ran the Kong syndicate's American operations from a building she could see from her hospital's roof. He had ordered people removed from the earth for less than what she had done tonight. He had also, upon arriving home, followed her exact instructions about the ice. Chapter 2. The Gilded Offer. 4 days later, Mercy General, break room. Imara was halfway through a cold cup of coffee and a patient chart when her charge nurse knocked and stepped back with an expression that suggested whatever was outside, the break room door was above her pay grade to manage. Han Jae-won walked in alone. He looked as out of place in the fluorescent break room as a blade in a bread basket, and twice as dangerous. He was wearing the same kind of suit, gray this time, and his left hand, she noted with professional satisfaction, was no longer being favored. Imara. You can't be back here. Jae-won. And yet. Imara. How did you get past the, she stopped. Right, never mind, what do you want? Jae-won. To offer you a job. He laid it out with the clean economy of someone who had rehearsed every counterargument she might make before she made them. The Kong organization employed over 300 people in Chicago. Not criminals, he was careful to say employees. Drivers, translators, kitchen staff, building managers, people whose immigration status or whose family safety made traditional healthcare an impossibility, people who got hurt and had nowhere to go. Jaiwon, I'm not asking you to treat men who have done things. I'm asking you to treat people who have no other option. Imara, and the men who have done things. Jaiwon a beat. That also. Imara, at least you're honest about it. Jaiwon, I've found dishonesty to be inefficient. The salary he named was 4 times what she earned at Mercy General. The clinic he described, a converted suite in a building the Kong family owned on the near west side, was already stocked. He had done this before expecting her to say no. It was the preparation of a man who prepared for every outcome equally. Imara looked at him for a long time. She thought about Mrs. Delgado, who had come into the ER last month with a 3-day-old wound infection because she was afraid of what the hospital paperwork would trigger for her family. She thought about the system she fought inside every shift and still lost too. She thought about what it meant to help people who truly could not help themselves. She also thought about how this man had iced his hand exactly as she'd instructed, which told her something she wasn't ready to name yet. Imara, I have conditions. Jaiwon, name them. Imara, I treat who I say needs treating. You don't override my medical decisions. If I tell you someone needs a hospital, they go to a hospital, consequences be damned. And I need Tuesdays off. My grandmother does dialysis and the transport service is unreliable. He agreed to all 3 without hesitation. That, too, told her something. Chapter 3. The Clinic. Week 3, the Kong Clinic near West Side. The clinic was better than she'd expected and worse than it needed to be. The supplies were excellent. Jaiwon's procurement team had clearly been given no budget ceiling, but the space was designed by someone who knew what equipment a clinic needed without knowing how a clinic actually worked. Imara spent her first week rearranging everything. Nobody stopped her. That was the first surprise. She had expected deference from the staff to be a performance, a dangerous politeness hiding surveillance and control. What she found instead was something closer to relief. These were people who had been trying to hold things together with inadequate tools, and she was the first person in years who had come in knowing what the right tools were. Within 2 weeks, she had treated a compound wrist fracture, 4 lacerations requiring sutures, a kitchen worker's 2nd-degree burns, and an acute asthma episode in a 14-year-old boy named Deho, whose mother wept and thanked her in Korean that Imara couldn't understand but didn't need to. Jaiwon came by the clinic on Thursdays. He never explained why Thursdays specifically. He would stand in the doorway of whatever room she was working in, ask a clipped, practical question about supply needs or staff concerns, and leave before she could ask him anything personal. She started preparing 1 personal question per Thursday. He deflected all of them. He was exceptional at deflection. She'd never met someone so skilled at being present and entirely unreachable simultaneously. On the 5th Thursday, he didn't deflect. She had asked, almost offhandedly, why he did all of this. The clinic, the careful provisions for people whose names would never appear in any public ledger of his good deeds. Jaiwon long pause. My mother worked in a fish market in Incheon for 22 years. She had 3 fingers broken by her supervisor during my first year in this country. She didn't go to a doctor for 6 weeks because she was afraid of losing her job. By the time she went, 2 of them had healed incorrectly. Imara quietly. Jaiwon. Jaiwon. She uses her hands differently now. Small adjustments. She doesn't talk about it. He looked at the window. I do not like it when people who work for me cannot access basic care. He left before she could say anything else. She stood in the empty clinic for a moment after he'd gone, feeling something shift quietly in her chest. The way ice shifts in late February, still cold, but no longer entirely solid. Chapter 4. The Yun Warning. Week 6, a threat intelligence reaches the clinic. The first sign of the Yun family was a man who came in with a wound that wasn't consistent with any accident and refused to say how he'd gotten it. Imara treated him without pressing. She'd learned which questions to ask and which to leave at the door, but she told Jaiwon's lieutenant, a quiet man named Siak, before the patient had even left the building. Siak went very still in the way men trained to manage crisis go still. He thanked her. He made a phone call in the hallway. Within an hour, there were 2 additional men stationed at the clinic entrance who had not been there before. The Yun family had controlled Chicago's north side for 11 years before the Kong expansion. In the geography of that world, this clinic and Imara's presence in it had made her a variable that the Yun family would eventually notice. Jaiwon arrived that evening, not on a Thursday. He came in through the back entrance, which she hadn't known had a back entrance, wearing something less composed than his usual armor, not disheveled exactly, but bearing the particular tension of someone who had been moving quickly through decisions for several hours. Imara. Who are the Yun family? Jaiwon. Rivals. Imara. That's not enough information. Jaiwon. They are people who would use you to get to me. The man today was a message. They know you work here. Imara. And Jaiwon. And I would like you to work from a different location until this is resolved. Imara. My patients are here. Jaiwon. Imara. Imara. The Delgado family's youngest has a follow-up Friday. Diho's mother is due for a check on her blood pressure. I am not relocating my patients because someone is trying to intimidate you through me. Increase the security. Give me a direct line to Siak. I'll adjust my hours so I'm not arriving or leaving predictably, but I am not abandoning these people. Jaiwon looked at her with an expression that wasn't anger. It was something more complicated, the look of a man recalculating, the specific recalibration of someone who had expected resistance and gotten something more than resistance. He had gotten someone who refused to be afraid on behalf of other people. He gave her Siak's direct line. He doubled the security. He also, without announcement, began staying at the clinic until she left each evening. She didn't ask him to. She also didn't ask him to stop. Chapter 5. The Ambush. 7:43 p.m., 3 blocks from the clinic. They were in Jaiwon's car. She'd accepted a ride home after a 12-hour day, a concession to practicality that she told herself had nothing to do with the particular quality of the silence between them when they were in enclosed spaces. She had her shoes off. She was reading a patient file. He was talking to someone in Korean over the car's audio system. The first vehicle hit them from the right. Imara's medical training kicked in before her fear did. She registered impact, velocity, point of contact, and then she was bracing herself against the door and checking her own limbs with the rapid, automatic assessment of someone who has worked trauma wards for 8 years. She was intact. The driver was slumped but breathing. Siak, in the front passenger seat, was already on his phone and drawing something from his jacket simultaneously. Jaiwon was not intact. The second impact had come from the left, and the window beside him had shattered inward. She couldn't see clearly in the chaos of the next 90 seconds, Siak pulling her out of the car, 2 men materializing from somewhere and returning fire, an engine, tires, a gap in the noise. But she could see Jaiwon's face, which was the color of old paper, and his hand pressed to his left side, and the dark stain spreading between his fingers with the grim efficiency of serious hemorrhage. Imara sharp, clear, no panic. Look at me, Jaiwon, eyes on me. She got her hands over his, pressing. Tell me if I'm touching anywhere that feels different from the rest of the pain, different pressure, deeper. Jaiwon threw his teeth. There. Imara. Okay, you're not going to bleed out in the next 10 minutes. I need you to stay awake and I need Siak to drive us to the clinic. Now, not a hospital, the clinic. Do you understand? I have what I need there. Jaewon. You. Imara. Stop talking. Conserve your blood pressure. You can thank me later. She did not pray. She had long ago made peace with a version of faith that expressed itself through action rather than petition. But she cataloged everything she had in the clinic's supply room with the focused, running inventory of someone who knows that adequate preparation is its own form of grace. Chapter 6. The Underground Surgery. The clinic 8:19 p.m. to 11:02 p.m. She had done emergency surgery in a hospital, surrounded by the full institutional apparatus of modern medicine. She had done field triage in a community clinic with supplies that expired 2 years ago. She had never done what she did in the next 2 hours and 43 minutes, which was open a man's side under fluorescent lighting with 4 people watching her who would have killed anyone else in the room for making a wrong decision. Using her own hands and the contents of a clinic she had stocked herself, and the 8 years of clinical knowledge that nobody had given her, that she had extracted, through work and study and stubbornness, from a system that had made her fight for every centimeter of it. She did not allow herself to feel anything about Jaewon during those 2 hours and 43 minutes. This was the discipline. In the ER, it was called clinical detachment. In practice, it meant becoming a tool, precise, clear, single-purposed, and storing everything else in a compartment that you opened later alone when the work was done. The entry wound was lower than she had hoped. The bullet had traveled at an angle, missing the major vessels but nicking the lower lobe of the spleen. She controlled the bleed. She irrigated. She closed in layers with the careful, even sutures that her first surgical attending had told her were the signature of a practitioner who had decided that excellence was not optional. At 11:02 p.m. she stepped back. Siak exhaled audibly. One of the other men sat down heavily in a folding chair and stared at the ceiling. Nobody spoke. Imara stripped off her gloves, washed her hands at the clinic sink, and stood at the window for a moment looking at nothing. Then she went to the small room where they'd moved Jaewon post-procedure, sat down in the chair beside his bed, and allowed herself to open the compartment. It was full. It turned out the compartment had been filling for 6 weeks, and what came out of it when she finally unlocked it was not what she would have predicted. She sat with it quietly until he woke up at 2 a.m. and found her still there. Jaewon hoarse. You stayed. Imara. Postoperative monitoring, standard protocol. Jaewon. Is that the only reason? Imara a long pause. No. He reached for her hand. She let him take it. Neither of them said anything else for a while, and the silence this time was not the heavy, weighted kind from the wrong car on that November night. It was the kind that means 2 people have run out of reasons to keep distance between them and have, quietly, decided to stop trying. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. Recovery Week, the weight of what they've built. The Yun family sent a formal communication through the specific, archaic channels that these things moved through 3 days after the ambush. The message was clear. Jaewon's life would be the price of the Kong family's continued operation in Chicago. There was a timeline attached. There was no room for negotiation. Jaewon read it in the clinic's small office, propped upright in a chair because lying down still hurt, and his face showed nothing. But Imara had spent 6 weeks learning to read the things his face didn't show, and what she read now was not the cold stillness of a man in control. It was the particular exhaustion of someone who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has just been told the weight is about to increase. She sat across from him with coffee she'd made badly. She was excellent at medicine and poor at coffee, and waited. Jaewon, you should leave. Go back to Mercy General. I can create a narrative that protects you. The right people will understand that you had no knowledge of what the clinic really was. Imara, that's not what's happening here. Jaiwan, Imara, Imara. I knew what I was getting into. I'm not a naive person. I made a choice. So don't manage me out of this situation like I'm a liability. She stopped. I'm someone who has information that is relevant to any decision you make, so make the decision with me in the room. Jaiwan quietly. What do you want, Imara? Not what you're willing to accept. What do you want? She thought about this seriously, the way she thought about difficult diagnoses, not reaching for the comfortable answer but sitting with the evidence until the truth became unavoidable. Imara, I want to keep doing what I'm doing. The clinic, the people who can't go anywhere else. I want that to exist somewhere that isn't controlled by the Yun family's fear of you or the Kong family's need for leverage or any of the rest of it. She looked at him directly. And I want to do it with you, not as your employee. The clock on the wall moved. Traffic sounded from somewhere below. Jaiwan set down the formal communication from the Yun family with the care of someone setting down the last piece of a life they're choosing to leave behind. Jaiwan, there is a way out of this, but there's no coming back from it. Imara, tell me. Chapter 8. A New Longitude. 6 weeks later, somewhere that isn't Chicago. The town was small and coastal, and had the kind of reliable anonymity that comes from being beautiful enough to attract visitors, but not quite beautiful enough to be fashionable. The clinic they established there, a genuine one, registered correctly, staffed by Imara with 2 other nurses she'd recruited through channels that had nothing to do with organized crime, served a community of fishing workers, undocumented families, and elderly residents for whom the nearest hospital was a 40-minute drive on roads that became dangerous in winter. The paperwork said the clinic's primary funding came from a healthcare nonprofit based in Delaware. The nonprofit's founding donor was a man listed, in documents that were correct in every verifiable detail, under a name that was not Han Jaiwan. Imara did not ask him too many questions about the transition. She had her conditions, the same ones she'd laid out in the break room at Mercy General, and they were all intact. She treated who she said needed treating. Her medical decisions were hers alone, and she still had Tuesdays off, though her grandmother no longer needed the dialysis transport, because Imara had arranged for a mobile unit to visit twice weekly and had trained a local volunteer to coordinate the scheduling. The man who was no longer Han Jaiwan cooked in the evenings. This was a fact that continued to surprise her, that someone who had navigated the upper atmosphere of Chicago's criminal infrastructure had taught himself to cook out of a Korean cookbook his mother had mailed him, annotated in her handwriting in the margins. He was also, she had discovered, genuinely funny, dry and sparse and easy to miss if you weren't paying attention, which most people hadn't been, because most people were too afraid of him to listen properly. She was not most people. On a Tuesday evening in late spring, she sat on the wooden steps of the clinic's back entrance and watched the light change over the water. He came out with 2 cups of tea. He'd learned that she disliked coffee even though she drank it out of necessity, and had quietly replaced her habit and sat beside her. The Yun family believed Han Jaiwan was dead. The Kong family had accepted the transition of Chicago operations to a cousin in Seoul. The clinic in the city had been folded into a legitimate community health organization, and Deho's mother now had a regular GP and a case worker, and no longer needed to fear what standard healthcare would cost her. Siak had moved to Vancouver. The world had rearranged itself around their disappearance with the practical efficiency of things that are built to continue. Imara, do you miss it? Jaiwan considering honestly. Some of it the certainty, knowing exactly what each day's problems were even when the problems were serious. He paused. You. Imara, I miss the ER sometimes, the speed of it, the particular kind of teamwork. She wrapped both hands around her cup. But I have patients here who I will know for 20 years, who will bring me vegetables from their gardens and argue with me about their blood pressure medication, and whose grandchildren I'll probably end up treating. She looked at the water. That's something the ER never gave me. Jaiwan. Continuity. Imara. Yeah. He didn't say anything else for a while. The light continued its slow negotiation with the water, the way light always does when it has nowhere particular to be. Imara had not planned for any of this. She had planned to survive a double shift and get home. She had sat in the wrong car and found, sitting in the front seat of it, the particular intersection of challenge and complication and quiet, unexpected tenderness that her previous life had not contained. She had not run from it. She had brought her conditions and her skill and her refusal to be managed out of rooms where decisions were being made, and she had stayed. She thought there was probably a lesson in that, about wrong cars and right destinations, about how the routes that change you don't announce themselves. But she was a practical woman, and practical women don't spend too long on lessons when the evening is this good, and the tea is exactly the right temperature, and the man beside them has, quietly, learned to make it that way. Imara. I have a patient at 7 tomorrow, the fisherman with the shoulder. I think it's a partial rotator cuff tear, and he's going to argue with me about surgery. Jaiwan. Do you need me to look intimidating in the waiting room? Imara laughing, a real one. You couldn't turn that off if you tried. Jaiwan. No, he agreed, but for you I keep trying. The water held the last of the light as long as it could. Then it let it go, the way all things eventually do, and the evening came in blue and generous and full of what came next. And next, please subscribe.